Year's is long over, as are probably the resolutions you made, just like me, to make life just a bit more contented this year. But Real Economy is determined to kickstart 2015 by understanding the formula that determines the economics of happiness. On the show, we'll head to the Netherlands, where we look at the money, work and family life balance that puts a smile on little and big faces. We'll debate the validity of happiness economics and ask the pioneers of the field, in Paris, Professor Jean-Paul Fitoussi, and in London, Professor Lord Richard Layard, about whether we should be looking beyond GDP to measure how happy we truly are. But run-of-the-mill indicators don't really measure, say, the joy in our children's play. They're more about short-term ups and downs. In Europe, we measure well-being beyond GDP. So looking at things like standard of living, family and social life, it gives us a clearer picture of how a country is really progressing. It's objective, looking at things like disposable income, and also subjective, looking at, for example, life satisfaction. So here's a crash course on how you can measure your happiness.
Want to rank your happiness? First, calculate your country's GDP per capita. That's how much average wealth is being produced. Then you climb to figuring out your life expectancy with good health. How long can you live without getting very ill? The next rung is your social support. Do you have a support structure of friends and family in good and bad times? Then gauge the level of corruption in your country. Does it hold you back? Equally important is generosity. How selfish or not are you or your fellow citizens? And last but not least, are you free to make fundamental choices in life? You then add up the results of all these gauges along with subjective well-being assessments. These are collected through sample interviews based on the so-called Cantrell ladder, by which you judge where you are on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best possible life, and where you will be in 5 years. That equals how happy you are.
We're a contented lot here in Europe. If you take a look at the UN World Happiness Report, it shows a clear trend that's expected to continue when the 2015 report comes out in the spring. Drill further down into Europe, and a regional study of 79 cities shows how access to sport, culture and even our city streets separates our happy Europeans from the not-so-happy ones. Now, the Netherlands is often cited as one of the top 5 countries in the world for life satisfaction. So Emily Ruffey sampled a bit of the Dutch recipe for a happy life in Amsterdam.
For the Jansens, happiness starts at the breakfast table, the one time they're all together.
We sometimes talk about what makes us happy in the day-to-day life. It does make us happy when we hear him in the morning saying hello, because he's always happy.
They're happiest on Wednesdays when George works from home, spending time with his 7-year-old son and helping around the house.
If I look back, my father was really at home late in the evening. He did not see much of us growing up, let's say, during the week. And I'm, in that sense, more engaged, more involved.
Gender equality, flexibility at work, work-life balance. The Dutch recipe for happiness seems to lie in blending all these ingredients in the right measure.
In Nederland, 75%
In the Netherlands, 75% of young mothers work part-time, some fathers too. What we notice nowadays is that the government fosters this flexibility at work, so that parents, men and women, mothers and fathers, can better organise themselves at home.
And that works for Marie-Elaine. Despite working only 28 hours a week, she earns a comfortable salary, and with her husband's wage, they make a combined €140,000 a year, with half going to the taxman. That helps pay for the Netherlands' public services.
I use public transport also, and it's, well, almost always on time. You can get everywhere. It's not cheap. In fact, I think it's very expensive. That could be much better.
While money doesn't buy happiness, it does seem to help a lot. The Netherlands has one of the highest GDP per capita levels in Europe, just behind Luxembourg.
And that, despite Europe's economic crisis, has helped Marie-Hélène and George maintain their life-work balance, meaning Berend never has to miss his hockey training. The Jansens, like the majority of the Dutch, seem to have the recipe for happiness.
we mentioned the UN World Happiness Report, one of its authors, Professor Lord Richard Layard, joins me now. How do you define happiness? A feeling, reality?
Yes, no, absolutely. It is a feeling. And we can measure it. We can ask people how they feel, how satisfied they are with their life. And we find that the answers that people give have objective validity. You'll find that in many countries, like America and Germany, happiness has not risen over this long period, although there's been this huge improvement in living standards.
Is it serious enough now to be part of public policy?
Well, I think that is increasingly that attitude among policymakers. Britain is the first to measure the happiness of its population, and now I think all the OECD countries almost are doing it. Mrs. Merkel, she is very much in favour of focusing public policy on what she says, what matters to us, which of course is not necessarily the things that policymakers have focused on.
Do you think in Europe we are following all the parameters?
Mental health needs to be an extra pillar of social policy, and within the health sphere, we need parity of esteem between mental and physical health, which we don't have anywhere in the world at the moment. You will find, going back to what makes a satisfied adult, that a child who is doing well at its school is likely to be less satisfied than a child who is emotionally healthy. The biggest predictor of a satisfied life is emotional health in childhood and not success in your academic performance. So we need a complete rethink of the priorities in our society towards well-being.
Do you think we can do that in the current economic environment that Europe is in?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're still spending huge amounts of money and we need a reallocation of that money towards things which really matter to people most of all.
When Europeans think about well-being, their biggest concern is unemployment, though not as much as a few months ago. They also worry about economic conditions and immigration, which interestingly makes it to the top 3 concerns not related to the economy. They also worry about social security, health, public debt and inflation. So does the economics of happiness take all of that into account? Gianni Maggi put that question to the students and faculty of Rotterdam's Erasmus University, a pioneer in the study of happiness.
This is the capital of happiness, or at least economic happiness. Here students scrutinise the satisfaction levels of people of many nations. But what is their concept of happiness and how do they think happiness should be pursued?
For me, income is just a means to an end, and that end is happiness and being healthy, because we all want to live happily ever after.
So people are, I think, under a lot of pressure to perform well economically. But maybe it would be good if there would be some more pressure towards other factors of life that are very important to people, such as social relations that people might have, just having families, having communities.
I definitely think that we should at least try to evaluate our policies in a different way. So really make sure how we evaluate it, if something was a positive or negative for our society in general. And maybe the effects in the society are a bit different than the effects on the economic indicators.
Students are sensitive to personal and social values, but a recent study reveals a positive correlation between GDP growth and the rise of happiness in most countries. Moreover, average happiness has increased more in nations where the economy is most strong.
If you compare across countries, then it's absolute income that matters. If you compare within countries, then it's not only the absolute income, but it's also the difference. If even in a poor country, if you're less poor than other people, that's still, a little source of happiness.
In the past, there was a big focus on economic growth, on GDP. Nowadays, in more and more countries, this focus is sort of shifting towards happiness, life satisfaction. But we shouldn't forget about GDP or economic growth. I would say happiness should be like an additional thing to look at. And we should be even more open-minded.
Conditions for happiness in nations are, economic development, freedom. Freedom is quite important. Equality, trust. In societies where people trust each other, the level of happiness is higher. So that is the short list of determinants, of societal determinants of happiness.
Before it became fashionable to talk about happiness, came the original commission set up in 2009, put together by Amartya Sen, Joseph Stiglitz and Jean-Paul Fitoussi, who joins us now. Mr. Fitoussi, if you look at the criteria, does it cover all the aspects?
Happiness it's a subjective concept, but well-being or quality of life are the objective concept. Of course, there is money. But there is health, decent job, because we have observed that the cost of unemployment is much higher than the loss of income due to unemployment.
Do you think it is now more than rhetoric?
Well, there is a part which has always been rhetoric, but there is a part which is real. The government does not understand why they are not re-elected, what the people is feeling. You are always speaking of the return of growth, and if many people do not see growth in concrete, they will think that you are a liar or that you are making a policy addressed toward the rich. If you have a strong growth, but which benefit to only 1% of the population, even the government is not interested to have that, because that is the recipe not to be re-elected.
So how do you bring inequality down?
You need growth, people, but growth in income. If you invest in the green economy, if you invest in the new technology of environment and energy, by definition, you will have income which would be distributed. And so I don't see any contradiction between the search for growth, if it is for a majority of the population.
On that note, thank you so very much for your time.